like to speak to this morning from the theme, Fighting for Jesus. Fighting for Jesus. I just want to share a few of the verses from our reading so that those who are only listening to the recording will know the text from John chapter 18, verses 33 through 37, just a few of the verses there. Then Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own? What did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me." Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over." Fighting for Jesus. Fighting for Jesus. After our last few sermons, you should be familiar with the general history of this moment. Well, actually, there are two histories. There's the history contained in the story that the gospel tells. And then there's the history that contains the book we call the Gospel of John. The history contained in the story takes place around 33 of the Common Era, at the time of Jesus' death. And it wasn't quite yet during the Jewish-Roman War. But still, his death, we understand, took place during the festival of Passover, when Jews celebrated freedom from slavery in Egypt and the Egyptian Pharaoh, only to find themselves re-enslaved in their promised land by the Roman emperor. Kind of traded one Pharaoh for another. So even in the history contained inside the gospel story, Jesus died during a tense and fraught moment. But the history that contained the book, the Gospel of John, is also a fraught time. The Gospel of John was written in the aftermath of that disastrous, bloody, costly, and devastating Jewish-Roman war, when Rome had destroyed the temple and killed tens of thousands of Jews in Jerusalem. It is a time when the emerging Christian community was making its case against Judaism and to the Roman world, that Jesus was not just another Jewish Messiah like the ones who had brought about war and destruction, but was a savior for all people, Jew and Gentile, Roman and Greek, male and female, slave and free. The core issue in the question posed by Pilate, "Are you a king?" is still the core question for us today. To whom do you give your highest allegiance? That's a question for everyone gathered here. To whom do you give your highest allegiance. Now, the ploy of the early Christian church to kind of separate themselves from the Jewish community that had just revolted and been crushed by the Romans and try to curry favor with the Romans didn't work. Ultimately, the Romans would turn on the Christians with a bloodthirst almost unparalleled in human history, using Christians as fodder for the so-called games in the Colosseum, where they were thrown to wild beasts and killed in all manner of gruesome ways for the entertainment of the masses. And the pretense for all of this mayhem was just one simple question. Do you pledge allegiance to the Roman Empire? That was the question. That was it. Do you pledge allegiance to the Roman Empire and to Caesar, the emperor? Well, the Christians refused to pledge allegiance to the emperor. They claimed their allegiance not to the Empire of Rome, but to the Empire of God and Jesus as their sovereign. Jesus is Lord was originally not an evangelical slogan. Jesus is Lord was a cry of resistance, which meant Jesus is Lord, not Caesar. When we read the inscriptions of the Caesars, they had titles. How many of you have been to Rome and seen the Colosseum? And they have Pontificus Maximus, blah, 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 all those Latin phrases. All of those were titles. And within those long titles was very regularly the divine Augustus. To the Romans, the Caesar was a god. And so the cry of the Christians, Jesus is Lord, was a defiant cry of resistance that Jesus is Lord, not Caesar. So the question to us today is this: is Jesus your monarch? Is our allegiance to the Christ or to the imperial nation? Those who study sociology are very familiar with the concept of civil religion. Civil religion merges one's allegiance to one's nation with a almost religious devotion, and often appropriating the dominant religious symbols of the community or the nation itself. Some of you who are of age, not me, but I've heard about it and read about it, that back in the late 50s, early 60s, it was quite a controversy whether churches would have an American flag on the chancel. And many churches moved the American flag from the chancel to somewhere else, because the American flag should not sit next to the cross of Christ. Because for Christians, Jesus is our ultimate and highest allegiance. So what does it mean to hold our faith as our ultimate allegiance? Even Jesus recognized that it takes followers to be a king. He said to Pilate in that narrative of the story, "If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over." Now, the key phrase is that his followers would be fighting. But you see, Jesus was not fighting to be seated on the throne in Jerusalem or the throne in Rome. But Jesus' followers were fighting to enthrone him in every heart. And that is still our ultimate calling. We are still fighting for Jesus. But we do not fight with clubs and knives. We're still fighting for Jesus, but we do not fight with guns. We all heard the verdict in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I claim that the verdict is clearly guilty on guns. You see, if Rittenhouse was not armed, he would still be alive today. But so would Anthony Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum. If Joshua Zeminski had not been armed and fired his gun, Joseph Rosenbaum, a tragic, mentally ill young man who threw a baggie with a deodorant stick at Rittenhouse, but the baggie being thrown and striking, if you will, Rittenhouse, was almost simultaneous to some other person firing their weapon in the air, which gave the jury enough of a context of justification that Rittenhouse turned and shot an unarmed person that he reasonably thought had fired the shot at him and was trying to take his rifle from him. So Joseph Rosenbaum might have been alive if this other person had not been armed. If Grosskreutz had not been armed, he might not have been shot in the arm. So Rittenhouse was found not guilty because he acted in self-defense. Well, he may not be guilty, but he certainly was wrong. He was wrong because he went to Kenosha that night prepared to kill someone. And that's exactly what he did. How do I know? Because he took a gun. He took a gun with him. Taking a gun means that you are preparing to shoot somebody. The entire sequence of events was predictable. It was predictable to his mother, who drove him to the scene of the crime, predictable to his friend, who gave him the weapon he could not legally buy himself, and it was predictable to Rittenhouse. He was found not guilty according to our crazy laws of self-defense, wherein all you have to do is believe you are in danger and you can kill anybody you perceive as a threat of great bodily harm or death. So, if you point a gun at me, I have a right of self-defense. And I can take it from you. But if I try to take it from you to keep you from killing me, then you have a right to kill me to keep me from killing you. Got that? Now, you might not have had any intention of killing me, but if it is reasonable for me to perceive that you are aiming that gun at me, then this whole tragic sequence of events can rapidly unfold in the blink of an eye. And the sad part, as this trial has demonstrated, is this: whoever survives is not guilty. You both have a claim of self-defense. If the person who had pulled out their pistol and was running toward Rittenhouse had gotten off the shot first and killed Rittenhouse, he would have been innocent for self-defense for the same reasons. He's not guilty of murder because of their right to self-defense. It's the wild, wild west, y'all, where whoever is the quickest draw wins and is not guilty. That's what we are in this country. We used to watch it on TV. You know, you line up in the middle of the street and you walk 10 paces, and whoever shot fastest, they win, they live, and they're not guilty. That's what happened to Crosskreutz. He drew a pistol, and Rittenhouse beat him to the draw and shot him first. Therefore, no crime. Grosskreutz survived. He got shot in the arm. But he's the perfect example of a bad guy with a gun getting the best of a good guy with a gun. And a bad guy or a good guy with a gun can become a bad guy with a gun in just one flash of a bullet. Rittenhouse is the bad guy because he beat him to the draw. He's deemed, but because, even though Rittenhouse was the bad guy, because he beat him to the draw, he's deemed innocent of attempted murder. But we, Christians, people of the way, disciples, followers, we are still fighting. But we fight with love, and we fight for justice. We still offer our lives in sacrifice for what we believe, but not in the arena against wild beasts. But we fight against wild ideas and crazy conspiracy theories that cause people to live lives of hate and intolerance and make people want to burn books and fire teachers for teaching the truth about the American empire and what it has done around the world, across its history, and what it does even to its own people. We sacrifice our participation in a consumerism and materialism that demands our total allegiance and lays claim on all of our resources. We fight with the voice that we have. We fight with the vote that we have. We fight with the feet that we have. We fight with the faith that we have. And we do not fight to destroy our opponents. We fight to redeem our opponents. Redeem them from hatred and racism and homophobia and patriarchy. And on this Trans Day of Remembrance weekend, from transphobia. To redeem the soul of America was the mission of Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Other politicians have adopted it as their political slogans, but it started in the 1950s with the goal of redeeming the soul of America through nonviolent resistance. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, was established in 1957. And how did they go about redeeming the soul of America? What was their charge? What were their marching orders? The job of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was to coordinate the action of local protest groups throughout the South. That's how they fought for civil rights. They organized protests across the South. Well, today, and you've heard me say it before, well, there's down South and up South. Who would have thought that Minnesota and Wisconsin would be the center of the civil rights struggle in 2020 and 2021? They organized protests, just like the protests for the shooting of Jacob Blake that brought people to Kenosha, Wisconsin that night. That protest was in the same spirit of the protests that won civil rights for those for whom they'd been denied for centuries. That protest was just still trying to end the assault on Black bodies by police officers across this nation, up South and down South. That protest stands in the tradition of the protests going back as far through Stonewall, through all the protests that have tried to expand civil rights for all people in this country. And now they've taken the tactic of violent counter protests, and they bring their guns. I wish Group Coates, I wish Huber and the others had not brought their guns. We see what happens when you mix mental illness and weapons. Bad things happen. This tragic young man, Rosenbaum, threw a deodorant stick at Rittenhouse, and he turned and shot him dead. Our struggle is to redeem our opponents. The struggle is not against white people or men or any group of people. But as the writer of Ephesians said, our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil. So, if love, nonviolent resistance, protest in voice and vote, and arms of peace instead of arms of war are our weapons, then what kind of empire are we seeking? We seek the empire of God, an empire where every child has daily bread, an empire where everyone is deserving of forgiveness and mercy, an empire where God's will is done on earth. And for that empire, we will fight. We will fight until our very last breath. Let the people of God say, amen.